So I'm about to introduce our speaker, and I have notes so that I don't screw this up. Our speaker today is highly educated across several theological lines. To explain, he attended Lee University, which is a Church of God institution in Cleveland, Tennessee. He received his doctorate of ministry from Evangel University in Springfield, Missouri, and then came into the world of leadership in the Pentecostal movement. Now, you know, if you know the Pentecostals, they are a very passionate group, and I can find good in every single area of faith. And in this case, our speaker today became a true highest order holy roller, which meant that he would speak in tongues, that he would do hands-on healing. He actually stood on the platform with Benny Hinn. If you all know who that is, that's amazing. Benny could wave his arm, and the first 6 rows of people would all pass out. Amazing stuff. And then he found Ernest Holmes and Thomas Troward, and it changed everything. And he began studying the works of these masters, and it changed his life. It changed his life dramatically, to where he went from being a minister in the Pentecostal movement to being a minister in the New Thought movement. He was ordained by, let me get this right because it isn't the name that I use. He was ordained by the United Divine Science Seminary. Divine Science is the same organization that ordained Ernest Holmes. Yeah. That was before there was a religious science or a science of mind. So then he moved into leadership. He served on the board of Divine Science Ministers back in as far as 2011 and held positions of treasurer and vice president. From there, he served as the president of Divine Science Federation International from 2014 to 2020. This is a big deal. He's a member of the International Association of Counselors and Therapists. Within the International New Thought Alliance, INTA, which many of you may have heard of, he has served as a district president, Congress chair, and as a member of the executive board. I served on the executive board, so I know what that means. He is currently serving as the president of INTA. Yeah. So it's okay to be impressed. He and I became good friends along the way with all of this. In fact, he was reminding me this morning that actually happened when there was an INT event here, and he came over. And I'm not going to tell the story. I leave that to you. But we connected right away. And what I want you to know about this man is he has a heart of gold. He is generous to a fault. And when he speaks absolute truth. And you're going to love this. So I present to you my friend and colleague, Reverend Dr. Tim Stewart. Welcome, brother.
He actually had some things in there that I didn't share, so that means he has researched me a little bit. But I am so happy to be here. You have, yes, my friend, but you have a real treasure within Science of Mind, within the New Thought movement. You have a treasure that's a treasure to all of humanity right here on this front row in John and Barbara Waterhouse. Would you give your... And I am so grateful that our paths crossed. I will tell that when I first met John, I believe it was 2014. Does this come up a little bit?
It does, if I come up there and help you. There you go.
When I first met John, I believe it was 2014, and he was hosting the International New Thought Alliance Ministerial Enrichment and Development Conference. Now, we shortened it a little bit. We just call it our ministers' conference now. But we came to see how things were done here. And I'll have to say that I've been to several of these, and none have ever impressed me more than I was impressed with the works here. But as John wanted us to wanted the room to be introduced, he has something he really likes, and I liked it. He likes everyone to be introduced by someone who knows them. Have you ever seen him do that here? Introduced by someone who knows you. So he walks up to me, and he introduces himself a little bit, and he says, we've never met. He said, is there anybody here who knows you? I like you to be introduced by someone who does. And I looked around the room, and I looked back at him, and I said, John, everybody here knows me except you. So that was the thing. We had been around a lot of the same people, but we had never been introduced to each other. And I am grateful for that day. So he has touched my heart, and he's real. There's no pretense to him, you know? I like one day when I was here, because I go to different places and different cultures, and someone use all their titles. They're expected to, almost kiss the ring. He's, no. He says, I don't need somebody to tell me who I am. I know who I am. And that's the kind of person that I just so admire, his realness. And Barbara, this morning watching you on that, my goodness, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. To talk about what we're going to talk about today, it was real simple. I just called it taking the next step, or the next step. So what does that mean? It's kind of one of those vague things. It's like, man, we're going to take it to the next level. How many times have you heard that one? Well, what exactly is the next step, the next level? Well, I'll give two answers. One, it really depends on where you are, what your next step is. And everyone in this room today, you're probably not all at that same place in your spiritual unfoldment. But the next step that I'm talking about today is whatever it is that allows you to unfold to a greater expression of who and what you truly are. A greater walk with love and joy and peace and empowerment. And I could go on and name so many things. But what does it take to unfold that? I'll ask you 3 questions today. You don't have to answer out loud, but I want you to rate yourself. This is not about feeling bad or puffing up. This is just about getting a true assessment of yourself. One of them is your experience in life. Are you walking in a way that you're experiencing the abundance that Spirit and God intends for you to experience? Is it something that is clearly an ongoing, regular, consistent expression of divine abundance? Well, I'll tell something of myself here. I can remember a time when I was expressing it like this. I would get to a point that I really needed a financial movement in my life, and the next thing I would walk to the mailbox and totally unexpectedly find a check in there for $27,000 one time. Had no idea it was going to be there. But to do that where it's consistent, it's regular. How many of you remember when you first got into this and it was a big thing, you manifested that parking spot? Man, and if you're at that place, I'm not knocking it. Hey, keep growing, all right? Get ready to take the next step. Because it's wonderful, especially if it's pouring rain, to be able to get that spot up front. But if you can manifest that great place when you go to the mall and you walk inside, and your thing is you're looking at something and say, man, I wish I could afford that. Boy, if I just had some money, I would buy that. So if you're going to do that, let's begin to go onward in that so we walk in that place of abundance. All right. And if you rate yourself somewhere, do it from 1 to 5 on it. The second question I will ask you, are you having life as a joyous adventure? Your day-to-day walk, is it something you find joy in? Do you find fulfillment? Do you find that there's purpose in your life? That doesn't always correspond with what I'm talking about when I talk about an abundance. I have someone that I'm very close to, and she had a job that was paying her over 6 figures a year. She had great benefits, worked for a strong company that, she got to travel, she had a great expense account, and she was so miserable because she kept talking about wanting to do something else. And I said, what is this? What is it that you want to do something else? What's the problem? And she said, I want to do something that touches people. In other words, she wasn't getting satisfaction from what she was doing. So aside from everything else, because you can have both of these, but is your life something that you feel gives meaning to what you're doing? Not just that it's paying the bills, not just that it's putting money in the bank account, but does it give you satisfaction? And the third question is, are you consciously creating your experience? Now understand this, your experiences are created exactly according to your belief. You ever heard that before? Uh-huh. Yeah, I figure they have. You're creating them. The question is, are you consciously creating it? And you got to understand, you've got to learn how to do that a little bit, because otherwise you can create things in a way that, we don't outline. We don't outline how something comes. We know the end. We don't have to outline everything in between. Several years ago, I wanted a specific car. And I knew that probably my wife wasn't going to go along with wanting to spend that much money. And we do talk about things like that. We've been together for 23 years, so obviously we talk about things. Somebody this morning, I was near their purse, and I said I didn't want to get between them and their purse. And they said, yes, and a man should never go into a woman's purse. I said, I can prove I've never gone into my wife's purse. I said, I still have both my hands. Okay. But I knew it, and I remember sitting one morning, and I was in a Honda Accord that we had at the time, and I had a pickup truck. But because of what I was doing, I ended up having to drive the Accord most of the time, and she was driving the pickup that I had, which was also a straight shift. And I remember my thought was, she'll never go along with getting a new car unless this one gets wrecked. All right. And then, if I can drive the straight shift, she's going to want me to do that. So as long as I'm able to drive a straight shift, that's not going to work. So that was my thought. Careless and reckless. But I was creating my experience. Because what happens is I pull out one day, and I'm in a little town called Hodgenville, Kentucky. Okay? If I'm not mistaken, it's part of, Abraham Lincoln has a connection there. Okay? But pull out, and it's kind of a misty, rainy day, and suddenly this pickup truck that's in that lane is over in my lane, and I feel there's no place to go. I lock up, and he hits me head on. All right? They come, and I can't move from the waist down. I was all right. There was no damage to my spine. But in that sudden shock of that being hit, it was like I couldn't move. Some people came. They got me out of my car, the smoke coming up from the hood and all this. The guy who was in the pickup truck, his truck was still on the road. Mine was half in the ditch. And I remember they got me out and laid me on the street to get me out of the car. They came and had to cut the other man out of his pickup truck. He was on a blood thinner, and they were afraid he was bleeding too much. They took him first, then they took me. I ended up on a helicopter being flown from Elizabethtown, Kentucky to Vanderbilt Hospital in Nashville. And I had to have surgery, and I have some titanium in my ankle over here. All right? But guess what? I got the car. I got the car in the exact month that I decided I wanted to have it. So be careful how you think of things, okay? You're consciously creating your experience. Didn't have to go through all of that. But I will tell this about the ankle. When I did that, I did spend 81 days that I was either in a wheelchair or on crutches or a walker. And when it was over and I started walking again, I went to my orthopedic surgeon at Vanderbilt Hospital, and he had me walk down the walkway and walk back, and he looked at my medical record and he shook his head and he said, "Do that again." Almost like he was angry. And I walked there and I walked back, and he looked at me and he said, "I don't understand why you don't limp." I said, "I don't limp in my mind, that's why I don't limp in my body." So, are you consciously creating a life you love? Are you consciously creating the life you love? You are creating it, but are you taking that and creating it consciously? Now, if you all evaluated yourself, most of you weren't at the bottom of the scale nor the top. You were probably somewhere in between. Was there anybody who felt like they had all of those areas the absolute best that it could possibly be? One. Good. That's great. Now, I'm so happy to see somebody that feels that way. What is the wonderful, wonderful news is that God is infinite. We have this infinite field of possibility. And so when you reach the very best that can be, in the next moment there's a greater opportunity. That's right. In the very next moment there's something greater. There's no place that we max out. You know, it's like, you know, infinity. We can't quite comprehend infinity. If you were to take all the sand from all the oceans and beaches and the deserts of the world and be able to put it in one place on this earth and pick up a grain of that and get in a rowboat and row across the ocean and stack it in Europe. If it were all in America, you'd stack it in Europe. If you carried it one grain at a time, by the time you got finished, think of that in time, you haven't even begun to scratch the surface of what something infinite can be. In other words, I was comparing that in time to infinity. You can't begin to, there's no such thing as a percentage of infinity, because the smallest percentage of infinity is still infinity, right? So constantly room to grow. And one of my sayings that I like comes from a divine science writer. And usually I quote Ernest when I'm in a religious science church, and I spend more time in Centers for Spiritual Living probably than I do in divine science churches, because you have more of them, all right? But Melinda Kramer, who was the founder, wrote, and she said, an essential thing. Do you know what, everybody know what essential means? You can't do without it. It is absolutely necessary. An essential thing in the beginning of our work is to turn the basis of our thought from observation to principle. Well, I talked to most of you here this morning, or several of you, and I find that many faces looked familiar because when I was here in 2014, I saw many of you. I even got, as I told him last night, I got to see John wearing a dress, dressed up as Queen for a day. He's making that face like you shouldn't have said that. I took the photo thinking it was going to be great for blackmail one day. He told me last night he has a copy of the picture already, so. But many of you I met, I sit over and was actually in service here on the Sunday following that. But many of you, you're not at that beginning. But every day is a new beginning. Every time you begin to move upward to that, as we talked a while ago, that next level, that next step, it's a new beginning. And you begin by going from whatever you're seeing, whatever says you can't do something, and you push that aside and you look at what's possible. You look at principle, knowing that it can be done. And you finally evolve from that into making it real in the now. Any of you in here Neville Goddard fans by any chance? Anybody? Oh, wow. Okay, some of you like Neville. That's great. Neville, in a book he had called 5 Lessons, he starts out in the very first or second paragraph of that first lesson called Consciousness is the only reality, I believe is the name of it. And he writes, and he believed that everyone in the Bible was metaphorical. He didn't believe anyone in it was real, yet he used the Bible exclusively when he taught, every time. And he used the story of Jacob and Esau. And I promise I'm not going to get Pentecostal on you. No snakes. I'm not going to dance in the aisle, okay? But if any of you know that story, Esau was the firstborn technically, but Jacob took his birthright. I won't go into all the details of that. We don't have that much time. I've never spoken over 3 hours in a service in my life, so I want to keep it up to date that. Yes, in the Pentecostal church I once did. But he first calls Esau to it, his current condition. And then as he sends Esau away from him to go out and get venison, Jacob comes in. And he wants Jacob to come so near to him that he can feel him. Jacob was his dream, his real desire, the one that was going to get the blessing. But you have to get it to the point you feel it. That it's so real to you, that you desire, it's so real that it's feeling it in the here and now. It's not out there. You live as if. Live as if it's already done. And you need to recognize the power that we have. You know, when I talked a while ago and I mentioned the parking spot, and again, if you're at that point and you're new in this and you're thrilled because you got a great parking spot at the store the other day, I am happy for you. I'm not, I'm happy for you. I want you to keep going. But when I left the traditional church, I had a friend who held a doctorate in pharmacology. He had started the pharmacy department at one of the universities in the state of Louisiana. So much so that not only did he have the doctorate in pharmacology, he had an honorary doctorate that was bestowed on him by the legislature of Louisiana. And then he had something you rarely see, and that is he had an accredited doctorate in naturopathy. So as I knew him, I had been impressed because he had done some things that had really helped me. And I thought about naturopathy, and I ended up studying hypnosis and hypnotherapy. I went to New York State and studied there in Manhattan with a gentleman by the name of Dr. Richard Hart, H-A-R-T-E, and he had the Hart Institute. He was a behavioral psychologist. And I learned clinical hypnotherapy. And I would do that, and then I still continued doing that as I got into the science of mind. And I had an ordination, but I had a lady who came to me one day. And I don't share anything without someone's permission. So when I'm sharing, I have the person's permission to share it. But a young woman came to me one day, and she wanted me to do hypnosis with her. You may have heard this because I have shared it before. But she came wanting me to do hypnosis, and she told me she was schizophrenic. Well, that's contraindicated. You just don't do it. You just don't. You don't want to do hypnosis with somebody that's schizophrenic. And she kept talking, and I had given her a referral form, and I said, take that back to your psychiatrist. If your psychiatrist signs off on it, then and only then will I even talk to you about it. I won't promise you we'll do it, because quite honestly, I would question any psychiatrist who would recommend hypnosis for a schizophrenic. And she continued to talk, and I let her talk, and finally she says, you just don't know what I've seen. And I said, well, tell me. And as she began to tell me what she had seen, she suddenly said, and I know it's all my imagination, but, and by the time she got the but out, I interrupted her. I said, say that again, what you just said. And she had this strange look on her face as she looked at me and said, it's all in my imagination. Well, when she said that, I began talking to her. Now, this young lady had been raised in public housing. She had been raised just with a lot of horrible things happening in her life. but she had converted over and was going to a Baptist church. This is where to use what you have. You can't, Ernest Holmes said, don't take someone's God away from them until you can offer them something better. Okay? Don't take someone's God away from them until you can offer them something better. And in her case, that's where she was. So I looked at her, and I used that church background that I had. And the first thing I said to her, I said, now, tell me something. I said, am I right or wrong? After the resurrection, Jesus said, all power, A-L-L, all power in heaven and earth is given to me. Is that right? And she said, yeah, that's right. She was ready to say amen. That was kind of part of her culture. She was ready to rock with that. And I said, and I can step off here. I don't know if you're filming, but if you are, you'll have to follow me and walk down here for a second. Because I simply reached over to her and I said, if I have all the money in the world, all of it, if I have every penny in the world, all the money in the world, can you give me a nickel? She looked, she shook her head, she said, not if you have it all. I said, if I have it all, you can't give me a peso. You couldn't give me, now it's a euro, back in those days I used Russian ruble. I said, you couldn't give me any money of any kind, not if I have it all. I said, so if all power means just that, all power. Now, I wasn't caring at that point whether she called it Jesus or if she called it the Easter Bunny or Elvis Presley. I didn't care. I wanted to get her out of duality thinking. I wanted to get her out of her observation of her struggle and to a principle that said there's nothing there for me to fight. Anything that I'm fighting, I'm creating myself. Somebody agree with me on that? All right, that's all right. You can talk to me. I'm used to that. I had people talk back to me a lot, and sometimes I even encourage it. You know, we want you to think for yourself. We don't tell you what to think. We try to teach you how to think. So in her case, I wanted to get her realizing that there was nothing there for her to fight. And then I used another verse with her, which was from over in Acts where he said, in him we live, move, and have our being. Now what I'll tell you that I didn't tell her, that if you read that right before it, it says, as certain of your own poets have said. And that was Paul quoting Epimenides, speaking of the god Zeus, the Greek god Zeus, because he was trying to speak to people that was their religion. I said, so if all power is there, all power, that means the very power that I have to animate my body, to move my hands right now, to be speaking, comes from one source. I may get to choose and delegate how that's happening in my life, but it still comes from that source. And she could agree with that. And I said, so all these things that torment you, where are they getting their power? And she says, well, I guess I'm giving it to them. And I said, yeah, okay. At that point, I hand her a card. That was my minister's card. Did not identify anything about hypnosis. And I said, I'll see you as a minister. I said, I will not talk to you about hypnosis if you want to come back. She had no money to pay me, so that was part of our agreement. I would protect her identity, but I could use it as an example when I wanted to. And the only thing I did with her is she would come in and we'd talk spiritual principle, and I would do prayer treatment. And I would get through with prayer treatment, and I would say, and so it is, and she would say, in Jesus' name, amen. And I let her do that. I didn't care. I wanted to get her out of duality. That was fine. But several weeks later, I got a letter from her psychiatrist thanking me for the professionalism I'd had in sending the referral and so on. And he said, I don't know. And first of all, he did let me know that her diagnosis was not schizophrenia. It was PTSD. But he wrote me a letter and he said, you've done more for her in these few weeks than I've been able to do for her in over 3 years. All right, that's the power of principle. That's the power of getting in principle. And because I've gone longer than I meant to, so I'm gonna, and I'm not halfway through, so I'm gonna get there, okay. Regardless of where you are, your next step always starts by getting in and remembering principle. I'm going to look at my notes to see how much of that I want to skip for a second, okay? The other thing, what I'm going to say here, if you're going to do that, when I came from that traditional background, we always look at somebody when they came in and say, oh, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. A friend of mine who's a unity minister in Savannah talked about one of his members brought him a packet. They had gone to church with one of their family members. And they'd been given a big list this thick of you've got to do this and you've got to do that. I'm telling you, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to do anything. You are a beautiful, divine being. Remember this, it's not God and man. It's just God as man. God as humanity. Okay? So it's not God and. When we say we're one with God, when you say with, you're actually talking duality. We have a finite language trying to explain an infinite principle. So we do things, and then sometimes that little spark comes on and we think of a better way to say it. But, coming over here yesterday, I didn't have to stop and get gasoline. I did because if not, I had to face the consequence of having to call up and say, hey, John, I'm about 20 miles out of Asheville here. You got a gas can? I really didn't want to do that. I have a feeling he would probably come in and shake his head and think, what is wrong with you, man? That's something that I expect a 16-year-old to do. And believe it or not, I'm well past 29. So you don't have to stop for the red light. But you may have to pay the ticket or get your car fixed, or heaven forbid, it can have some really serious consequences. You don't have to. But if you want certain outcomes, then sometimes there are things that you kind of have to do to get those outcomes. Would you agree with that? So today, if you really want to take your expression a little further, start having a spiritual practice that's every day of your life. Every day of your life. I often say this, and I'm going to try to wind up here in just a couple of minutes. I did not mean to go past where it says noon there, so pardon me. Okay, I'm sorry, John. I really didn't. I didn't realize I was getting that long-winded. I must have put something in I didn't plan. But I shouldn't have said I'm sorry either. I caught myself. I will report to the principal's office as soon as the service is over. But if you have a spiritual practice every day, our practitioners, and we have great practitioners in the Centers for Spiritual Living, but I've often seen, even with practitioners, sometimes they have to be in that quiet space, and I'm like, but you need to have done that quietness and that meditation to the point you are so sure of who you are and so sure of your word when you speak that word, that when it's that moment, you don't have to get all caught away. And it's going to take me, 3 days of meditating to get into that spot. You need to be ready. Does that make sense to everybody? So that's what I'm saying. And I actually have something here, but instead of going through that, John, are you teaching any more classes before you leave here? Here's what I'm going to tell you, because I do advise people this. Have a time every day that you take a few minutes to write. Write what it is that is your heart's desire. Desire. D for deity, sire for the source of. That is your heart's longing. That is God's message to you for what is possible, what can be in your life. Okay? So write about that. And then once you've written it, take the time to read what you've just written and see if what you wrote really came through clearly and it resonates with you. Read it over again. Take the time for meditation and for prayer treatment. Prayer treatment is not about changing God's mind or talking a far-off deity into showing you favor. It's about aligning your consciousness with the truth of what you truly are, and it's aligning the truth with what you truly desire. It's getting you in alignment. That's what you can do that. And what I really want to say is this. Today, if he's having any more classes before he leaves, take it. I don't care if it's a class you've taken 12 times, take it again. I've probably taught most of them. But if I were here, I would be in his classes. Robert, if I were here, I would sit at your feet and say, teach me. Because, as I said, they're gems. They are a treasure. And whoever fills this pulpit next, I'm sure you're going to have someone else who's going to bring their uniqueness here. And you'll learn. But you will always learn it at a deeper level. You'll always pick up something new. You pick up something new even when you teach it again, don't you? So that's it. Develop that spiritual practice. Take every class you can, and that will take you to that next level, that next step. And that's how you get there. And so it is.